Hi, I'm Matt from California, and you're listening to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast.
Yeah, I look at that picture on my wall every day, man. Um, thanks for joining us, everyone. Matt and I started talking before we even hit the hit the intro. So as you heard in the intro, my guest today is Matt, the Storm Wizard, a regular friend of the show, friend of mine, and one of our Storm Rider Legionnaires. And today, Matt and I are going to be talking about a few of his most recent airsoft games. Going to be recapping some of the stuff that's going on in his airsoft life on his side of the continent, really. And also talking a little bit about the importance of sort of asking why, to use our friend Steve analogy, to what end, and surrounding yourself with people who are able to challenge you about what you're doing without making you feel bad about yourself, but in a way that allows you to actually grow and what that looks like in real life. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Dude, I can't imagine anywhere I'm happier except actually on the field.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, a couple other places, but airsoft related for sure. So what's been going on in your life? I know you've been primarily playing at All Patriot. Is that right?
Yeah, ever since I got back from Iron Horse, it's only been for like fields. Yeah, fields has been All Patriot Airsoft. I stopped going to CQB City, and there's a few other fields around that I stopped going to just because of the way they chrono a little oddly. They do HPA differently than AEGs. Some old wives' tales that people have about, and that's actually our first question there is why do people believe this? There's a lot of airsofters around here who say, oh, so and so told me, and so and so told me, and so and so told me, but it's as easy as setting up an AEG next to an HPA gun and putting them through chrono and putting your chrono a little bit downrange, and you can see that there's no reason to ever chrono your HPA differently from the AEG if you sit there and think about it long enough, right? Once it leaves the barrel, that's the end of it. And there's our first why. I'm glad we could jump right into the end of the episode, right? We'll do a Tarantino thing now. But yeah, so I've been doing a lot of All Patriot, and they actually have a fun, it's fun and different because camouflage is a thing for me again now. Because they have an outdoor field, there's farmland around it, and they actually allow growth of grass and weeds and shrubberies on the field. And so as the seasons change, it'll actually change the way that people dress and which camouflage you need to use if you want to remain camouflaged, which is cool. Because when we were at Iron Horse, that wasn't a thing, right? Everything was big cement buildings. It didn't matter that my pants were white. All the green guys stood out just as bad, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is a bit of a, I don't think I've ever asked you this question, but I know that, California wildfires is a thing. And do you guys have any issue with pyro and stuff outdoors at your fields? Is that a concern of yours?
Oh yeah, we have seasons, right, when we can and cannot use pyro. This has been a very dry summer. It's been very, very, very hot for a very long time. 4 or 5 weeks where we had temperatures over 100 Fahrenheit, around 38, 40 Celsius, right? And I bothered to convert it because it was absurd how hot it got. Like one day I'm like, hey guys, it's 44. And everybody's like, I don't believe you. And I had to show them.
Yeah, really.
So
during that time, you're not using pyro. Are you using alternate grenades or anything like that? Or just sort of say...
Thunderbees. There's a lot of Thunderbee play around here. They're relatively cheap to run. They're like $3 a blast when you store it in the cost of the CO2 canisters, and you use floor BBs or catch box BBs or trash can BBs, just so long as there's something in there to throw. And Thunderbees work well enough. They're a little unpredictable based on the temperature and how well it penetrates, but good enough. I mean, I wish we had tornadoes. I'm actually looking into Flamingo now because, we're all looking for the next best grenade, and it sounds like Flamingo is the way to go. So I'm going to be with the next guy from California, I think, to order a case from them and see what I can do about that. The thing about California, right, and just hot weather in general is there's no pyro out there in the dry grass. We have to use alternate. Indoors, we could still use pyro, but the thrill of indoor isn't what I'm after right now.
Yeah.
So it's no pyro at the moment. And so that means I'm running two Thunderbees when I can be bothered to run grenades.
And so you mentioned camo. I want to press you on that a little bit because I know that like we were saying, when we played at Iron Horse, camo was not a thing. I know that I've seen pictures of you from BFLA where you're wearing that awesome picture of you actually You're wearing tiger stripe, if I'm not mistaken,
Yep.
right? Is
Oh, yeah.
that what you're rocking now, or like, do you have a couple of things that you're cycling through?
It depends on the weather. Right now in the summer, like we said moments ago, it's very, very dry. Everything is brown and tan. So I'm actually using three color desert, or what's
Hmm.
sometimes is DCU, and it's working amazingly well. You can see pictures of me out playing, and I'm actually now nitpicking my own kit about like where the next spot I need to make less visible is, because you can look at a picture of me outdoors and be like, okay, he's got a tan hat on, he's got tan shirt. That all just kind of blends into what's behind. But now I realize that my guns are very black. The
Hmm.
HPA adapter for my AAP is very, very black. It stands out a whole lot. I had a few magazines, black magazines on a belt in a picture. And I looked at it, and they were the most obvious thing in the world on my kit. And this isn't something I ever, I didn't consider until like more recently, like playing along with the situations I was in, and adapting my camouflage to the field I'm at. Because
Right.
at the time it didn't make sense. Back when we talked many, many years ago, as Phil is known to say, when we first talked, it was all indoor. It didn't matter. But now it's a whole new thing. And it's actually interesting because I can look back at it and I can go back in that first conversation we had. We talked about what things from the Army helped me. And now, oddly enough, this, I
Yeah.
remember the basics of camouflage, where you should highlight, where you should darken, how you should layer your colors. And it's pretty cool. You can see the upgrades in my camouflage from, I've still got my primary blaster up there on the wall, all sorts of colors.
Hmm.
But this is the AAP I ran as a pocket LMG at an event last weekend.
Oh yeah. So it's very muted. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and you can see in the pictures what stands out most is the back right here, where I didn't want to mess with the hammer, and then the HPA adapters is very, very dark.
Hmm.
Uh, so that's changed a lot, right? Like, didn't ever think about it before. Now we've got actual different camos. I'm looking at other camos for other seasons. Fortunately, when it gets green here, it gets very, very green, very dark and lush, and the tiger stripe works out beautifully.
Perfectly. Yeah.
You can look at me up in the deciduous forest in the tiger stripe, the El Dorado forest, or we play at Three Creeks in Reno. That's
Hmm.
national forest land, and it works really well there in the cooler months.
Oh, you go up to Reno, do you?
Yeah, the Reno regulators, the guys who put on the Airsoft Challenge program,
Yep. Yep.
uh, they're actually from Reno, so they run a few games a year that they've been running for a few years now. As you recall, last year we talked about how I got my face beat in at Battlefield Rush, and
Hmm.
this year instead we did Conquest. It had the same 5 points, but it was a very, very different, more dynamic game because you could go around and attack from different angles. And the difference between Rush and Conquest is either way, there's five flags on the field. If you guys capture a flag, that can become a spawn point for you. In Rush, we had to do them one after another, so it was very easy for them to put up a defensive line. When we did Conquest, you could do them in whatever order, only your spawn could be captured. And that made for a much more dynamic game, because it wasn't just, we can grab 4 and be happy, because then the 4th one is exposed. And once the 4th one is taken, the 3rd one's exposed. And each one was exposed to the next one down the line. So there was no point during the day where we could relax on having enough of the points controlled.
Mm. So this was a game you played recently?
That is my very most recent game. I played a few at APA since I've been back, just pick up skirmishes. This is the most recent one I would call an event. It's the first event I played since Iron Horse.
Hmm.
Because I drove up. It was a 3.5 hour drive. We all meet at a little casino because it's in Nevada, and
Yeah.
that's where you meet. I got scrambled and eggs and bacon for breakfast, and I have a couple of cups of coffee, and then we all go down the big dusty trail down to the national forest. And it actually goes so far into the forest that it pulls us back into California, where we're technically playing in California. But we were in Reno, passing on the way through. It's just like a 10-15 minute drive out to the campsite. And then it's just hills and hills, and it's at 3,000 to 4,000 feet of elevation. So like 1 to 1,500 meters. And it was, I am a valley person. I exist at somewhere usually between 0 and like 1 foot above sea.
Yes.
So that elevation alone is enough to whoop me. But then it's a very, very hilly, very up and down situation with lots of rocks and cool big stuff. And I'm going to send you some pictures, and I hope you can do like a B-roll thing when you actually post this, and maybe like put up a few pictures so it doesn't look like I'm just a raving lunatic.
Yeah.
Because it's really cool. There's rocks and everything around, and there's great cover, and you guys can like pop up like a turtle or like just be like rolling along like the edge of the rock, and then you're just like, just your head's poking out and it looks hilarious. Or there's some rocks that were big enough to crawl under and around. It was a fairly thick forest. Like you got a tree every 10, 15 feet at worst. At close, they'll get to within like 3 to 5 feet. So there were a lot of trees, a lot of rocks, some very long sight lines, not enough that you could cover an entire area with a sniper or a DMR or even an LMG. So it was a lot of working together through the whole team, which is cool because we actually had teams together that had joined together, because since last year I made a bunch of friends and decided to play with them together, and we all formed a whole plan coming up this year. We all matched and we were super pretty, right?
Yep, that's very important.
Teamwork makes the dream work, bro. Both teams were teams this time. Each team had technical, each team had like equal numbers of DMRs and LMGs, and it was absolutely brutal back and forth all day. Like when we took the third pole to win, or the third flag to win, it was maybe 5-6 minutes less till the end of the game. Like I ran up and I turned the pole and I looked and I got shot like 20 times. I fell down. I know I'm dead. Because we had, I'd already been revived. I had to wait 3 minutes before I could be revived again because they fixed that particular issue. So I just laid there and waited. And then all of a sudden the game's over. I'm like, what? And I look up and the pole's right there. There was a dude rushing up the hill, maybe 10 feet away. But he didn't quite make it. And so we won. Like that was
nice.
It. Victory.
How long of an event was it? Was it like 5-6 hours or?
It was 2 chunks of about, the first one, it was meant to be 2 hours and then 1 hour, but everybody was having such a fun time that they extended it and it ended up being 3.5 hours and then 2 hours after lunch.
So that's not an insignificant amount of time too, especially like you're talking about the elevation, and I can't help but like recall like your particular background from, your previous job. Like that's stuff that you would have experience with just in general, or at least memories of dealing with that kind of stuff, right? So I guess, because I know I'm the same way, like we exist at sea level, right? So if you put me somewhere where it's 1,500 meters elevation, like it's a completely going to be, or more in some cases, right? Completely different game. And you just sort of showed up and rolled up and won them the game, no problem, right?
Oh God, I didn't do it. There was, when I went up and flipped the pole, there were 4 dudes behind me going, Matt, we got you. Somebody's going, Matt, go get it. I said, we're okay, bro. We got you. And then like there's a stream of BBs going over my shoulders. I'm like, they got me. And they did. They got me up to the pole and we got it. It was a team effort. It was not a Matt alone. Matt put his hand on the pole, but everybody else picked Matt up and moved him over there to get it done, right?
It was a real Samwise Gamgee hauling Frodo kind of moment, right?
Exactly. And dude, but I also played a support gunner, and those were the only people who were allowed to carry more than 2 magazines. All the others, there were several classes. There were the assault, the support, and recon. Recon could put out a mobile spawn beacon, and as long as it wasn't contested, you could spawn on it every 3 minutes.
Wow, okay.
So you couldn't just like stand there tapping the beacon. And if it was contested, which means if BBs were coming around the beacon, hitting you while you were on the beacon, it was contested, you couldn't spawn on the beacon. The next was assault, which is they had a prop of defibrillator paddles, and they have to touch you with 2, and that's an instant revive. They can only do that to someone every 3 minutes. So you could either get revived with the paddles or revive on the pole, but either way, you couldn't revive more often than once every 3 minutes, which golden. In that big of a space with that many people, with that long of a game, that was plenty. So that was cool. That was super cool. Well, the last one is support, which is they're the only guys allowed to carry more than 2 magazines. You can, no limit on magazines. The event provided BBs. They gave us unlimited 2.5s, which isn't my favorite, but they'll fire well enough out of the blasters I have. And it was unlimited. Okay. So I brought 2 tanks of air. I brought my gun, my daughter's gun, and my AAP, and all the magazines I own, right? So I brought 8 EPM ones, PTS EPM ones, and then 12 more Crytac mid caps, and then just some random, the mid caps that just appear in your drawer every now and then. And you're like, where did this even come from? I don't even own aluminum mid caps, but here we are, right? So I had a whole bag full of that, and I shot every last BB from every magazine more than like 6 or 7 times. I went through, I talked to Huck on the Discord about it, and I actually did the math through all that, through the BBs. I brought the times I restocked, the number of times I reloaded my magazine, and between my 3 guns, I shot about 20,000 BBs into those woods this weekend.
Well, somebody else is paying for it, so you might as well, right?
Dude, yeah. I mean, I ran my daughter's gun until my first air tank ran dry, and then I took it as an advantage because I had some pistol things to do for the Airsoft Challenge program. So I grabbed out my AAP and I fired that thing until it just stopped going. I looked inside, the silicone oil was completely dried out. I've been able to since oil it up and get it running perfectly again. But probably put 5,000 or 6,000 BBs through that because I was just walking fire, just walking along, making my own lanes.
Yeah.
And then once that was down, I switched to my own rifle, the Kythera,
Yeah.
the longer range one, and I went and hopped in our technical because each team had a pickup truck with a camper, like a plywood camper shell and a turret sort of thing going on it. So I hopped in our technical, and we had a space about yay large out the between the cab of the truck and the armored plating that we had on the back, where I could stick the barrel of my rifle out to be safe, make sure I wasn't dinging anybody in the teeth,
Right.
and shoot at people who were trying to attack the technical. And then the machine gunner was up there and we were talking, like he'd be like, there's a dude coming up on the right, and he'd blast at him, and then I'd check the other side and so on and so forth. And so I spent the last half hour, 45 minutes of the game just riding around in the truck, picking people off out of the side of my with my DMR. And it was absolute blast, dude. I can't remember the last time that I got so many kills. It was vicious. They were everywhere. They were coming out to fight, and every time I thought I had destroyed all the enemy, they'd be coming in like 6 or 7 dudes from another direction, and it was an amazing game. Shout out to Gavin, Dustin, to Fatal Prescription, and Lars, Bogan, Chase, all you guys, Smokey. Dude, it was an absolutely amazing time. They made it for me. It's amazing to work with a team. Steven, thanks for bringing out your truck. Mahoney, thanks for all the help, dude. It was amazing.
Was it player-owned vehicles, or again just provided by the game?
Well, the blue team was what Dustin provided the vehicle, one of the ACP guys. It was his pickup truck, and
Gotcha.
he's been working on it as a technical literally since they put the ACP together, and he's just put it together. And it's been at every game, but mostly like a background piece. But this year he was actually running in the game, driving around, people shooting out of it. The other one is a good friend of mine named Steve. It's the funniest thing, right? I'm an EV technician. I'm looking into getting an EV for my business installed, like with a charger installed at my house. He installed chargers.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So the people you meet, he's installing the charger for me for my company. Cool thing, right? Anyway, it's his pickup truck. He built this big plywood camper, and he actually camps in it like the night before an event. But then he puts on top a round thing that he built, that's this plywood chicken shield turret thing on some rollers with a hole about yay large that you can stick a machine gun through. And we could put, whoever wanted to be a machine gunner up there on there.
Yeah. So, and so you said it was like a 3.5-hour event and then like a 2-hour event. So is it like a situation where you play for the first 3 hours and switch sides, or like what was that? Was that all about?
Yeah. So the first half we played from the trenches, which was the north end of the field, the area we were playing in. And that's an all uphill fight until you get to the first hill, and then it sort of slopes gently down. But it's an amazing fight to that first hill. And that first hill is kind of the central point. The other spawn point was a little bit further back from the hill. It was like a gentle walk up to it, but it didn't offer as many avenues of flexibility. It was a more tight spawn where you had to spread out from, whereas the other spawn, they could just sort of envelop us if they wanted to and come in. So both directions had their strengths and weaknesses. One was really defensible. One was really easy to attack from.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is the situation where you're talking about, and I kind of want to come back to this because I think it's thematic, but like, you're playing in the deep woods, deep woods and deep woods, like the deep woods here, like you're talking about how, you've got like 3 to 5 feet between trees, and I'm like, we don't get like 12 inches between trees. So but that's not the point. So, you talk about camo. So likely you're wearing your proper camo for this event, right? Were you wearing Desert Tiger, regular Tiger, or the DCUs?
I was wearing DCUs. We were going to be tan team, and I looked into other tan camos. Like I really did actually like look at multicam and see if it would fit the area, even though I don't generally wear multicam. But with how dry the hills were and everything, I went with the DCU. It blended in well with the dirt roads and paths around there, and with the drier weeds and scrub brush around the lower areas.
Right. And so and it ties into this thing that I want to talk about too, which is that we've talked about, you mentioned like early when you were playing all the time at CQB City, it's all CQB. So you're not worried about camo and all this kind of stuff. And this idea that like you get one airsoft kit and like that's your kit and that's what you use all the time versus the idea of understanding what the game actually calls for or necessitates. Like if you just want to have fun and you want to dress, well, then you remember the guy at Iron Horse, or maybe you didn't see him dressed like a banana. Like if you want to do that, that's fine. But like if your idea is I want to be effective, understanding the parameters of what you're going into and applying changes to your kit to suit that becomes like a critical part of how you prepare for these games, right?
Oh, absolutely, dude. There's no denying that just a slight change of your color palette can change everything at a game where it's outdoors, and it does matter, and you don't have flashing bands on your arms.
Mm-hmm.
Because like looking down the hill, trees provide a crazy amount of shadow. It's weird to try to look through trees and rocks at the same time, and try to pick people out in just the mildest camouflage, the plain tan or the olive green, ranger green, more popular these days, but either one works just as well. And that's the lightest thing you can do is break up, is just put a basic idea that you want to break up what's obvious and big and human and unusual about you. So it's not as much matching the color palette specifically, because there's a lot, and I mean a lot of colors out there. You need to match the patterns of the nature around it. Right?
You got to get rid of the human, right, as much as possible. Like, it always strikes me people who like, oh, I'll wear a baseball cap, like that's fine, and or like, I don't really need like scrim, or I don't need stuff on my head, or like, and it's like, well, I mean, technically you don't, and it's not life or death, but like at the same time, like that's all. This should be part of it in terms of if being effective is what you care about.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like I love having a laugh as much as the next guy and being entirely ridiculous, right? But once you decide you want to be effective, there's a line, right? Like I'll save that for the skirmishes and the open games, and when I go play indoor again, because I will some places. But it's also like applying the things I learned in those places in this sort of game. Because a tree and a rock can make just as tight a corridor or just as tight of an alley as any plywood and Connex building, right? So the game doesn't change fundamentally. It's just your perception of it and the way that you interact with the environment specifically.
And I always think as well, like about you in particular, and I mean, this was sort of my experience at Iron Horse. Like I'm rolling up with guys who have a lot more experience than me at milsim, not necessarily airsoft, but certainly milsim, and then a lot of like real world experience that I just do not have because that hasn't been my career path, and that's totally fine. But then so you go to an event like that and you're surrounded by other airsofters, and this sort of ties into what we might want to talk about later, but I think is interesting. Like, how do you leverage what you know to help other people who are immediately around you? Like, it's one thing to just be some juicers creating content on YouTube and doing whatever, but like you're playing with people who are on your team. Like, how have you helped other players to understand, hey, there could be changes you could make, and how do you approach that to not be an asshole, but also be helpful? You know what I mean?
Well, a lot of the time it's just asking people like, hey, how did you come about this idea, or approaching this and, hey, do you know about this thing? You want to keep, the judgment out of your tone as much as you can. If you roll up to somebody and like, hey, dumbass, that's not how a hop-up works. This is how it works. They're going to be like, I don't really care to listen to you.
You can only talk to me like that.
Right? Exactly. You see somebody turn their rifle sideways, you can be like, hey, do you know what a hop-up is, buddy? You look like you might be a little new at this. Can I help you out here? And they'll be like, oh, what's a hop-up? And you'll be like, well, if you turn your rifle sideways or like straight up and down, there's a little backspin on your BB, and you'll notice that when you turn up sideways, it goes a little bit to the left. And it's like, oh, I did notice that. I'm like, yeah, hold your rifle upright and it'll just go a little further, and always make sure you hold it upright. And he's like, oh, that's super cool. Thanks so much. So a lot of that is the tone and approaching it the right direction. If you're like, hey, it looks like this gun might be new to you, right? Or this gear might be new to you. Or, hey, man, it looks like this might be your first time at this particular field. I haven't seen you here before. Can we chat for a minute? Rather than going up and being like, hey, dumbass, you ever worked outside before? You don't want to do that. Or, hey, did your mom dress you up? Because all your stuff looks like you're a baby.
Again, you can talk to me like that, but nobody else.
Right? Like, once you make friends, yes, cool. But when you approach people, be cool about it, dude. You're not any better than anybody else because you've been playing airsoft longer, all right? Because you've been like, period. Anything you've done longer than anybody doesn't make you necessarily a better person. It just makes you better at that thing. And we all started somewhere, right? We all had to ask what a hop up was, or have it explained, or see it in action once.
Yeah,
So
100%.
we didn't all know what a hop up was like coming out the gate. And we
So
have to
did you?
remember that
Yeah, go ahead.
we just have to remember that like those people are going to be the next us, right? Somebody helped me at one point. Somebody once looked me in the podcast and said, "Hey man, I gave up my PC and tried out a chest rig. Maybe you do." And I'm like, "You know what, Phil? That sounds like a great idea. I'll try out a chest rig. Why not?" And that led to my whole journey of now running an ultralight kit.
So
Because
did you help any? Sorry, go ahead.
so just because somebody said in a nice way, "Hey guys, I tried this new thing. Maybe you should try it."
Yeah. So did you get a chance to help any players at this event? Like, were there opportunities where you were looking at people's camo and being like, hey, like, have you considered if you change it this way, it might be more effective? Or like, what was your team interactions on that level like?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There were a few guys out there who, like, especially from Fatal Prescription, those guys usually play at GamePod in Antioch, which is attached to the EVIC there. And that's another indoor field. It's a big warehouse. And so a few of those dudes don't go to a lot of outdoor events. They go to like 1 or 2 events with their team a year. And so their stuff is not as like settled. Like they wear ski rigs normally, but they have a Milsim rig they wear to these events. And you have to be like, "Hey bud, you think that this is the best choice for this sort of environment? Do you think that running your gas Glock with 50 round extendos, like 3 of them is really going to last you the day?" And bless his heart, I ended up loaning him my own mags, and we piled them all together, and didn't matter. I carried everybody's mags. He had more mags stashed around. Since I could carry mags, we just loaded my bag. So it was actually kind of funny. I had my pile of M4 mags, and then his big long Glock mags, and then we had one dude running an AR-10, so I had his mags in there. But there were things like that where it's like, "Yo, dude, I know you guys normally play indoors, but we're doing outdoors right now. Come with me and let's do this thing, or let's take it a little easy here," because you could tell like whole team sprinted off the bat, 100 meters, and everybody's, "Oh no! Oh, we all need to break in the base of this hill. Let's just sit down, catch it all." And we had to talk to each other, like, "Guys, we need to take it easier, walk slowly until we encounter, and then push with aggression. We can't just be using up energy." That was when it's like, we have to husband our energy and keep it tight for that sort of long scale, high intensity game. And that's something we had to talk to a few times about. The really fast guys on our team where like they would see somebody and want to take off. I'm like, "No, dude, there's still another 200 meters outside of our range. Speed."
Yeah.
And then there were
especially if you're air sick lowlanders, right? Like that's
we were right. Like these guys are from Antioch. It's 40 minutes that way. It's no higher, no lower. It's there, right? Maybe a little lower. It's closer to the bay. So yeah, no,
So I'm curious.
Air sick lowlanders. All right.
Exactly.
I brought stew for lunch, so I was good.
You were good. I'm curious for you, looking at this game, like, because we always talk about this too, like, what were some of your sort of like lessons learned or like the things that you're taking away from this to come back to either improve on or, you know what I mean, like to really sort of up your game? What did you pick up from this one?
I learned the importance of keeping separate elements of the team working in a vaguely togetherly direction. Because I had the radio with Fatal Prescription, and I was also friends with Steven, who brought his own team full of dudes, like different separate dudes, and we were all together on TAM team. I was able to like liaise between them, right? And then be like, "Hey, these dudes are going up this way. Take the technical up around here, and we can lay fire in another direction." And that was really cool. Is the communication like team wide on a larger scale super useful, and it's not something I've ever experienced before. Either because of the events we went to were too large for that kind of control, like that kind of fine control, or I've just been in events that were too open for that kind of coordination to work together. It was really kind of just a perfect combination of this was the right size event, the right number of people. There were about a total 150, maybe 200 players in this span of woods that was about, I would say, a click long and half a click wide.
Wow.
And so it was just beautiful, wonderful place to be out. And it fit together just right. So the thing I learned most was across a medium-sized game, or even I think I can apply it to the smaller games at APA, a little bit more of a fine-tuned squad by squad approach instead of an overall goal, and then just letting things happen can be a much more effective tactic.
And is that something that you enjoyed, playing that role of like liaising between two different teams and coordinating or did it not impede your ability to just be the Blasto as well as the Braino of the operation?
Well, I mean, it only happened a few times when we were able to coordinate that because the technicals had to stay on the roads, and but we were also close enough that we were able to yell. So once I identified somebody, and like some of these guys don't ever work together, I hop through a bunch of different places because I don't have much of a team that I go out and do things with. I glom to other people, and I could be like, oh, I know that dude. Hey, Mahoney, what are you guys doing over there? Okay, we're going to go around this way. You do that and we'll work together and pinch it in or whatever, right? And just being able to pick out one or two players from each group from a distance is a huge thing. So make friends.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, like I think that's a lot of what I was doing at Iron Horse on the radios and stuff. And I found that extremely fulfilling, but I also know that's not for everyone and that's okay. It doesn't have to be. But I was just curious your perspective because I know, just playing with you, like you love the action, right? And so I was just curious if you found that, but I mean, you're right. Like if it's only a small part of it, then that's a different story. So that was this event. So what else have you been up to? We mentioned like APA, and what other games have you been playing? Sort of what has it been like? So in terms of the kinds of players that you're seeing and the kinds of kit that you're running, and sort of just talk us through that a bit.
Well, I'm running a belt kit, and I've been running a version of this belt kit for years now, ever since I dropped the chest rig and realized I could carry all the mags I needed on a belt. And I've been shifting around just a few pouches that I use for specialty games. Like at Iron Horse, we needed 2 ace wraps. And I had like a medic pouch and stuff on there. But I'm seeing how I need to adjust it again for my day games, or if I can keep it slightly more longer game focused without impeding myself too much. Like I'm running banger clips and more carabiners now so that I can run more grenades when this season comes up, right? But those are things I'll admit I occasionally catch the edge of my glove on a carabiner, or I catch my arm on a banger clip, and that'll throw me off. So it's the same kit. It's just I'm adjusting it to see about larger scale games if I need to add anything. And the only thing I can honestly swear, all I need to ever add for a bigger game is radio and grenades, more grenades.
Yeah.
I don't feel you can carry too many grenades. There was one, like at Iron Horse, we could only carry 6. I would have been happy to carry an additional like 4 or 5. Grenades are a great thing to have on you in almost any game, but I'm also at the point where it's like, I don't usually get $10 to $15 out of it at an open game.
Yeah.
So I'm running Thunder Bees. Like I said, they're a lot cheaper to go. They're not quite as reliable as the other grenades, but I'm trying to make more of myself using grenades, honestly, because it's easy to forget they're there. It's easy not to think about it. It's easy to charge a building instead of going, aha. But if you stop and use them, it changes your world, dude. That's me. Honestly, I've never utilized grenades enough. And that is an adjustment I'm trying to make since Iron Horse, is using them more. There were definitely a few times I did not need to die at Iron Horse when I could have just thrown a hecking grenade, but I don't use them enough in my day-to-day games
to build that. Yeah, or to build that muscle memory too, because I think one of the challenges I've always found with grenades, because we've always used the more expensive tornado grenade. So I have never carried more than 2 tornadoes at any given time, because that's $200 a kit just on me, right? And so you're always, at least for me, like you're often in a position where it's like, do I want to throw this grenade now, or should I save it for later? It's like a healing potion in a video game. It's like, do I need it now, or do I save it for later when I might need it? Whereas at Iron Horse, like we had so many grenades that you never really think about that, because you're like, well, I've got like 6, so who cares? Like I'm not going to run out, so I might as well use it. Right? But to get to that point, you do need to get used to using, right? Which is the challenge that you're talking about.
Oh yeah. I mean, grenades have always been like a fun novelty thing, but I'm really, really going this year into leaning into using grenades more. And honestly, that's the only real big takeaway from Iron Horse, I guess. I wish I could say there was more, but I had spent a lot of time thinking about airsoft and trying to turn my kit and my gear into exactly the way I want it to be, so that my movements and my feeling and all my kit related stuff, reloads, grenades, medic pouch if I need it, adjusting my air line, should all be automatically. It should all become as automatic as raising my rifle and breathing, right?
Yeah.
That was like the one thing I didn't have on autopilot at Iron Horse, like, was the grenades. Again, like, I can't even say that too many times. Like, my body knows how to airsoft, except for that one glaring blind spot.
And so, what has airsoft looked like at APA for you the last couple of weeks, couple of months?
I mean, it's games, bro. It's open skirmishes. I'm having a lot of fun. I take daughter, my daughter Battle Bear with me. Those always make for better days, right? As you make more friends, the days will always get better. As you have a bigger friend group, as you can talk to more people there. If you're meeting up with people, it makes it a lot more fun. Because it's skirmishes. It's at a field I know. I know which way to go. I know what angles to take. The only thing that's different is who's on the other team, who's on my team, and how are we interacting together. So it's just, I mean, it's open skirmishes. What can I say about it at this point that we haven't gone over? You and I haven't gone over half a dozen times on this podcast, and you and Pat have gone over 100 times on this podcast.
Well, what I'm curious to hear from you, though, so I mean, APA, like, you know, you have a good relationship with them. It's a field that you really like. What can you do to sort of get out of the monotony of, to your point, what's a skirmish? I know the field. I know which way to go. The only thing that changes is who's on my team and who's the other team. Because that's our reality too here at, you know, when we play at Frontline, like we played on Saturday and it was, okay, well, we'll do a couple of village team death matches. Okay. And I could tell you the entire roadmap of what the day was, the 3 hours that we were playing was going to look like. And that's fine. I'm not complaining, but I can absolutely see a world where you're like, okay, well, I've done this 20 weekends in a row. I'm kind of done. Right. So what do you do with APA to try and keep that sort of variety going?
There's two answers for that. And the most obvious answer is up on this wall behind me. It's the Airsoft Challenge program. I've got 2 patch packs that I'm working on right now. The Rook and the Engineer, because those both require shotguns, and I've been trying to get my shotgun up and running for a year. I'm actually going to do it this year so that I can take it out on the field and get these last 2 patch packs done. And then the other thing is I mean, personally, and might just be a me thing, I gain a lot of satisfaction from helping less skilled or newer players get to places and do things that they thought they couldn't do on the field. For me, like the last time I played, I remember particularly there was this kid about bear sized, little tiny dude in his gray sweatshirt. I'm like, hey, you come up here with me. Let's go and find the bomb. And he goes, oh, let's go find the VIP. And he goes, oh, I saw him over there. I'm like, you did? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, follow me. Let's go get him. And that kid followed me all the way across the map. And and then I'm like, quick, you lay down fire. I'll grab him and push him. And so he got to just shoot out there. I'm like, see these 2 windows? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, shoot at this one for 2 seconds. Shoot at this one for 2 seconds. Don't stop shooting. And I left him with an extra magazine. I said, don't stop shooting until you hear the whistle go off. And so I ran and I grabbed the VIP and I delivered him. And I hear this kid's, rental AEG the whole time behind me. Yes, kid, get it. And I get back and he's like, did you get him? And I'm like, yeah, I got him over there. And he's like, you found him? I'm like, you led me to him. And he's like, yeah. And for me, that's a lot of what is very satisfying for me now is picking out a newer player or a less skilled player or a less experienced player and helping them figure out how I like to play airsoft, the ways that I do it, and how that they can use that in their own enjoyment, or how they can use me particularly to help with their enjoyment. Make a point at the beginning of every few rounds, because you'll see people come trickling in over the day at open fields like ours where you have rentals and stuff. And I make a point of every time looking around, seeing who's new. Like, these guys clearly, they just rolled up, but they know what's going on. Oh, look, here's a dad in a hoodie and his 2 kids wandering around like they don't know. So I'll be like, hey, I'm Matt. You guys want to play with me? And we'll go around this way. Usually we'll leave the dad behind a few paces in, but then like I'll go back to the spawn and the dad will be like, where are they? I'll be like, oh, they're up there and shooting people. And he's like, oh, thanks. And those are, the great moments for me is helping every other airsofter be slightly better. And it doesn't even matter if they're even if they're just new to the field. I can help anybody who hasn't played that place before, played that game before, played that mode before, or played with me before, to have a slightly different or better or new experience. And that's where I'm getting a lot of satisfaction in my game these days. It's not the game of airsoft itself necessarily, though I love the sport, I love the game, I love the LARP, and all parts of those things, which, while we're on the subject, sidebar, I no longer feel like the slider is from speed to milsim. I now feel like it's from sport to
Yeah.
LARP.
Interesting. Okay.
Because on one end, you do have the speed, but you also have dedicated skirmishers, people who have never been on a speed QB field, but still play skirmishes every weekend like they're skirmishes and not a bigger event. On the other end, you've got people who have rules for the armor you wear. Plate carriers do things. Your gun has to have been used as this gun in a real life. Ranges are based on that. You got like your Milsim West, your Galactic Civil War, your deep, I want to pretend I am this guy games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no getting around the fact that that's a LARP.
Yeah, for sure. And or games where you're at 5.58, only 7.62 can be a DMR, right? Sorry,
No, dude, that is okay. You know what? That is live action video game.
yeah, exactly. But so it's interesting. One of the things that you said really resonates with me when, of course, because that's exactly what this whole channel started out being. It's about how do you help other people get more enjoyment out of airsoft, right? Like by being better, well, it doesn't mean you win more games, but you feel better about what you did, right? You feel more confident in your ability. I heard recently like a coach talking about how confidence is all about having respect for your abilities, but also what you have done, right? And so being able to look back and say, oh, these are all the things I've accomplished. I've been playing for a really long time. These are all the games where I've been very successful and all this kind of stuff, which is all good. My thing that I always wonder about is, so you're being that person for other people. Who's being that person for you? And this sort of ties into the last thing we want to talk about, sort of the why aspect, right? Who helps Matt when Matt's helping other people?
2 people, 3 people, 3 people who help Matt a whole lot. 4 if you include Pat, but he's like a side character, unfortunately, in this adventure, right?
Yeah,
They're
okay.
talented, but the 3 people who most push me in airsoft, and then 1 Angel, because my daughter is perfect and she's the real reason for all of it, right?
Yeah.
But it's you,
Okay.
it's Frosty, and it's
Yeah.
Flick. Because any one of you will look at something I'm running and say, hey, what's that for? I can go, oh, well, I kind of like the way it looks. I'm like, yeah, but does it work? Like, well, okay, I guess my dump pouch isn't really necessary except when I'm playing Easter eggs because you guys watch me and my muscle memory immediately leads me reindex. I've never even thought about using a dump pouch. Frosty will look at me like, hey, what are you doing that for? It's crazy.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, okay, yeah, admittedly, this one thing doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't remember what exactly we're talking about, but it really helps when you have somebody and they can say, hey, are you sure that that's a good idea? And then I'll come up with a bunch of BS reasons because we all want to defend our choices, right? We want to say, I did this and there's a good reason for it. But sometimes you have to look beyond that and be like, okay, I did it, but was there a good reason for it? I saw somebody else do it, but does it really work for me? And a really good example of this is Tolan. Tolan does a lot of really amazing kits, but sometimes he does things because he sees them in pictures and doesn't really apply it to his thought process. He's like, oh, well, I saw this here. I'm like, bro, that was like a training unit, right? You don't actually want to go into airsoft with like a blank firing adapter on your gun or whatever, right? Wild example. People do not do this.
Yeah.
And then I gotta be like, bro, it stands out, whatever. And then he'll be like, okay, here. Well, I've got this tourniquet, right? And I'm like, but why do you have a tourniquet for airsoft? Do the rules for the games you play do tourniquets? He's like, well, no. And I'm like, well, then you have this little black and red tab on your shoulder that's just standing out 100, 200 meters away for no reason. Like, why do you have that there? And people like to get really defensive. And they'll be like, oh, well, the 10th Mountain Division in 2008 wore them in their right pocket. And I'll be like, I know, I was there. We wore that because we got our limbs blown off occasionally. It was an occupational hazard at the time. That doesn't happen at airsoft. If somebody's blowing your limbs off in airsoft, you've made several mistakes along the way. You're not in an airsoft game. You need to get out of there, bro. So people will say that, like, well, I saw this soldier do it. Or I saw that operator do it. I want to look like this guy. And I'm like, okay, yes. Impressions, I am 100%.
Yeah, different conversation.
Different conversation. If it's a costume and you want to say, I want to look like this person or this thing or whatever, golden, 100%. Do your costumes. But if you say, I'm doing this in airsoft because I saw this guy do it, right? If I'm like looking at some videos, I'm like, I should probably get a Fast One helmet. That's bonkers for me. I'll never wear a helmet again. It's too hot. It's too heavy for me. I can scrim a boonie just as well. I actually have a straw hat I wear most of the time. It's like a dull tan, although it blends in really well. Stuff like that, right? Like, gosh, I don't even.
But I mean, the reality is you're right. Like, I think, oh, for a lot of airsofters, I mean, it starts with the fashion show, right? You're looking, it's like, I want to look like so-and-so. I want to look like a character in a video game, or I saw the special operator who looks really cool. I want to look like that. And I mean, even me, like, I mean, I look at the Delta guys from Gothic Serpent, and I'm like, that would be a crazy loadout to do as an impression. Don't expect it to be effective. But that's where I think for a lot of airsofters, it really starts. And to your point, like, we have to be open to the idea of, like, does this actually support what I'm trying to do? Does it actually hinder? Like, I wear a helmet, you don't wear a helmet. I don't particularly think that my helmet hinders me any more than a boonie, but it also provides an opportunity for me to wear a GoPro, which is important for the kind of stuff that I do with airsoft, right? Which I wouldn't really be able to do as comfortably or whatever. But like, when it comes to, and that's important to me when I play airsoft, but I didn't wear a GoPro this weekend. I could have not worn a helmet, but I still wore it. You can have the conversation about, okay, well, is it more or less effective? And some stuff, you're like, you can take it or leave it. Like, I wear trail running shoes. I used to wear hiking boots. Do I think that there's a huge effective difference? Not especially. Combat boots, different conversation. Hiking boots, running shoes, whatever. But then when you start looking at, like, I used to wear a plate carrier with training plates. And I'm there like, oh, I'm just as effective in that as I am with chest rig. Well, when I switched to a chest rig, that became verifiably false, right? It was just, I was incorrect. And I hesitate to say I was lying to myself. I just didn't know any better, right?
You never know.
Well, yeah.
And then, but sometimes, like, the hard part of that is when you do find out being, a better way is swallowing your pride and your ego and saying,
Yeah.
yes, I feel like I'm a good airsofter. I've been airsofting for a million years, right? I know what's up. This new guy can't tell me anything, but sometimes you have to look at it and be like, well, maybe it is better. Maybe I should try new things, or maybe they actually have a point. If you've ever found yourself in an argument or a conversation or a debate about a piece of gear, and again, if you say it's cool and I like it, different story. That's not what we're talking about today. But if you say it works for me as your thing, then you don't have an actual argument or an actual point. If you can't say it works for me because my hand naturally falls to this point and it makes this movement for me to grab whatever item, right? Like, why do I wear my fourth magazine on my right side backwards? And the answer is because I move my hand like this and grab like that, and that's where that magazine is placed. I don't do it because it does work for me, but if somebody asked me, I have a reason, right? Whereas I've had people who have rows of magazines on their back and they're like, look, it works for me. And I'm like, dude, you can't reach that with all your gear on. It doesn't work. You're thinking
you're just built different.
You bent yourself in a way to make it think like it works.
Yeah.
But in reality, you're fooling yourself because you built this kit and you want to run it. You want to think it's super cool and effective. But then you need to realize that we're all at some point, again, just a beginner. The very beginner needs to realize just because he learned one thing doesn't mean he knows the next thing or the next thing, or that even the thing he learned is correct for him or in his context. Because airsoft is also an amazingly contextual thing. This is a constant thing you'll see online is people will say, well, I've played here and I know everything about airsoft. And I'm like, you don't play in anywhere like me. We had this problem early on with Jordan Glickman is he would be like, why would you ever need this? Airsoft doesn't work like that. And I was like, Jordan, play some games, bro. And then he played some other games, and he went on an amazing adventure that you talked to him about with his CQB and learning a bunch of other stuff. And he's a much more open-minded dude about it now.
Yeah, and I think there's just what you were talking about, swallowing your pride, is so interesting because the idea that you were wrong about something doesn't actually diminish anything about you or your knowledge or your skill set or whatever. It's just one other thing that you didn't know. Well, there's tons of things that you don't know, and you can't. I mean, it's different, I think, if you're arguing it to the teeth and you're like and in bad faith, right? Like, you know that you're wrong, but you just won't admit it. And another thing to be like, I'm arguing this because I do think it's right, and then later on you realize, hang on, I'm wrong. Not to mention the fact that the way that people dress for combat today, and I don't know a whole lot about actual combat, but just, bear with me for this analogy. The way that people dress for combat today is not the same way that they dressed when you were working, 20 years ago or 16 years ago, nor is it the same way that people dressed in, 40 years ago when my father-in-law was like. It evolves over time based on what we know. And so if that's true of the real world military, can that also not be true about airsoft, where what you did, at least for me, what I did when I started is not at all going to necessarily be what makes sense today. And you have to be open to, just because you're wrong about that doesn't mean you're bad in some way or less worthwhile, right?
Well, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I'm going to simplify your analogy here because real world military constantly evolving. You see their kit change year to year, but even something as simple as ping pong, has changed in the last 10 years. So I played ping pong in high school a little bit, and it is a completely different game than it is now, right? And if something as simple as a table with two paddles and a plastic ball can change into a completely different game, so much so that, 20 years later, I can watch it and be like, they didn't do that when I played high school ping pong, right?
Yeah.
How much more can something as complex as airsoft, even something as simple, relatively simple as a skirmish have changed in the amount of time? Like, you've been playing airsoft for almost 20 years now, right? We've been on this podcast right now. We got 4 decades of airsoft experience at this moment, right? But when we started, it wasn't, dude. The first airsoft gun I ever picked up
Yeah,
was
it's very true.
the most solid gun that you could get at the time was a clear plastic spring Desert Eagle.
Yeah.
And I couldn't imagine use a Springer in a very serious capacity today.
And it's crazy, that's a really good point. I think about when we used to play airsoft at Red Cliff back in like 2006 and 2007, the ranges that we were getting with our guns too. Like now, if for some reason my gun's not reaching out to 150 feet or, 50 meters, I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible, whatever. But it's not 20 years ago, but 16 years ago, I'd be like, this is insane. Like 50 feet, 100 feet, I'm like, this is great. And now I'm shooting 50% further than that. And I'm like, oh, it's not good enough. And like everybody is shooting HPA, the advent of HPA has changed the way that, replicas are on the field. Now, when we saw that at Iron Horse, almost everybody was running HPA now. Very few
You
AEGs.
need to adapt to
right?
each spring game type, right? It's not like an
Yeah.
AEG where you have to tune a spring very specifically and with each weight. Like, no, I'm
So that
using
means that,
weight.
yeah, but you're showing up to the field and people with HPA are running very close to like field limits always. Whereas with a spring, you're like, okay, well, I've got a 110 spring, so I'm shooting 1.5, or I want a 120, so I go up to 1.7, and there's no like skirt in the middle, like it's one or the other until the spring wears down. So I just think it's so interesting because this ties in, circles, to come back to what we were talking about right at the beginning to create this full circle. Like, your kit is adapted to the games and necessities of the game that you're playing, right? You're changing your camo, you're changing your, like you're saying, you need more grenades for a milsim or whatever. And then also you need to change over time and you be open to the fact that, hey, what I ran 2 years ago may not be the most effective setup today for the game that we're playing, the field we're playing, for the mission we're doing, right?
Exactly, dude. Like 2 years ago, maybe a little longer, is when I shed the chest rig, and before that it was a PC. And anybody who makes that same journey is going to have the same revelations that you and I had along it, that you don't need. There's a lot of stuff in airsoft that you see, and it doesn't just apply to vests or load bearing equipment. Foregrips, flashlights, scopes. You'll see a lot of really complicated things, and you don't need to get super complicated, super interesting. There are very few calls for lasers in airsoft, and I honestly don't believe there should be many lasers in airsoft fields at all because it's super dangerous. And a lot of our stuff is honestly not super well tested, especially when we're buying all our stuff on Amazon, Temu. Airsoft stores buy their stuff from Amazon and Temu and mark it up. So there's a lot of stuff that you see people having that you don't necessarily need. And I think a lot more emphasis, if you're caring about airsoft as a sport, if you're going to continue doing it and you want to be the best airsofter player, as a sport person, you need to be willing to adapt and change with how the game changes, to the new technologies, adapting to different ways of playing, when grenades go in and out of vogue, when LMGs or super shorties or whatever are taking over. You need to figure out why these things are changing instead of stubbornly saying around and saying, okay, some of it you can see is just some people do stuff because it's dumb. For a little while back, it was like shorty A2 stocks, right? Like, I don't know what that was about, but everybody in my field was doing them. Not one of them could tell you why, except I saw this guy running it, right? They said, oh, that's the meta. And I said, that's not the meta because I'm whooping you with my regular stock, all right? There needs to be a reason behind meta. You guys are just doing things. And there's a lot of that. You just every piece of equipment you look at, stop and think, why am I doing this? Did I want it in the last airsoft game I was in? Do I think I'll need it at the next airsoft game I'm in? Do I think I'll use it more than however much the money is worth to me this year, this however long? The next thing I'm looking at, like, I can't imagine buying more magazines right now. I've got 80 PM1s. I have repair kits for them. I'm done with magazines. I've got, until something better comes out, until somebody comes along and says, hey, here's the new 310 round EPM2s. Right?
Yeah.
Which, keep an eye out, because eventually somebody's going to make a better magazine. I've got a belt right now, and eventually, somebody's going to have a little teleporting device where I'll just reach forward, my magazine will appear in my hand. And I'm sure there'll be a step between those, right? And I hope to figure it out as it comes along, rather than being stuck on, well, this worked for me in the past, or I think this is cool, and then not adapting. Because as we get older, and it's barely creeping up on folks like you and I, but you can look further ahead to it. And a lot of you guys listening aren't even going to acknowledge that this is a possibility. But as you get older, you're going to slow down, and it's going to be harder to adapt and look at new technologies and understand them. And you have to stay flexible, and you have to keep up with these things.
Definitely.
Learn until the day you die.
It's funny, as a side note, we haven't really talked about this, but it also applies. This also applies to your training, right? Like, if you're not doing training, you probably should, at a very minimum, like the amount of training you need to do for airsoft is so minimal, but you need to, in my opinion, and I believe yours, you need to train the right stuff, right? And so, for years and years and years, we would have like indoor training nights where we would, train like barricade shooting, train like all kinds of different stuff. And then fundamentally, at the end of the day, the stuff that is the most important was just the ready ups. Train your rifle up on target, acquiring sight pictures, squeeze the trigger. That's it. We would do reloads upon reloads, which is, kind of useful. And then we do sidearm transitions for what? Because it was cool, but like trying to convince ourselves that, oh yeah, no, in game, we're going to have to do this. And it's like, it's just not going to be the thing. It certainly is worthwhile knowing, if you're carrying a sidearm, to know how to draw it and understand the mechanics of it. But being able to like dump your primary and draw your secondary in the flash of an eye is so infinitely less useful than just being a really, really good snap shooter, being really good with your ready ups, right? And
snap shooting is the game. Like, whatever kind of airsoft you're playing, if you have BBs heading towards him before his BBs are heading towards you, you're ahead.
Yeah. I remember doing like training, or not training sessions, but people talking to me about their training where they wanted people shooting BBs at them so that they could practice dodging BBs, like dodging out of the way. I'm like, I don't know if I've told this story before, but there was one local guy who used to say that. And I was in cover with, this is a funny anecdote, you might find this interesting or hilarious, but I was in cover with this young renter or whatever. And this other guy who I was shooting at was trying to dodge out of the way. He was fully in the open, trying to dodge like Matrix style out of the way of my BBs, and not going into cover, just straight up trying to dodge them. And he got lit up because I shot him like 20 times. And then the kid I was with was like, can you dodge BBs? I was like, no, just get in cover. You'll live longer.
Right.
But like, just that kind of foolish stuff. Like, someone needs to shake you and say like, why are you doing this? Like, to what end are you practicing the skill? Because it's not actually going to help you as much as, just having good cover mechanics or whatever else. Right.
Oh yeah. I mean, once again, we talk about this every time, but gear changes. The basics don't.
Yeah.
Point, squeeze, win.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Matt, I always love having you on the show. It's so much fun to talk to you about this. I'm very curious I'm going to talk to you a bit afterwards about the Airsoft in Reno, because I'm curious about that. But it's always awesome to talk to you. I'm so glad that you reached out so we can come on and have a chat together.
Yes, sir. Everybody, thanks for listening. As ever, I encourage you to follow your airsoft dreams, whatever they are.
And that's all we got for you this week. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.